Have you heard of the Over the Board Backgammon podcast by Ed Hall? If not, keep watching because he joins me in an exclusive interview in this video. Thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoy this video. Please like and subscribe, and you'll be notified every time I upload a new video. Let me know what you think in the comments below, what you'd like to see in future videos, and I'll work on it. If you love Backgammon, you can become a member of this channel, giving you exclusive access to the most popular videos. My book, Backgammon Backgame Strategies, is available. There's a link in the description to where you can get it if you're interested in the lessons. Please contact me via email. My email address is also in the description. Again, in this video, it's my great pleasure to welcome Ed Hall from the Over the Board Backgammon podcast. Hello,
Hi, Alex. Nice to meet you.
it's a pleasure. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. It's early in the morning here in New South Wales in Australia, so birds are starting to squawk outside the window. You might hear some of that in the
That's
recording.
great. That's great. So I have some friends in Australia that I play backgammon with or that I
Hmm.
know. But I'm very, very happy to have you. I know the new Over the Board podcast is very popular. People are really loving it. So I'm excited to talk a lot about that. Uh, but first, I'd like to start with a little bit of background biographical information, if I may. Can you please tell us where you were born and raised?
Sure. So I'm from the UK originally. I was born in Manchester. I grew up there, went to school there, went to university there, spent a large chunk of my early life there, and then spent a little bit of time in Edinburgh after that, where I met an Australian girl who I followed when she came home, and I've spent nearly half my life in Australia since then.
So now you live in Australia.
Yes, I married that girl, by the way. We have three lovely kids. So
Oh, good. How old are your kids?
12, 9, and 8.
Okay, I have a 9-year-old son and a 4-year-old daughter. Do your kids play backgammon?
Well, yeah, my middle daughter in particular is interested in the game and has been learning. I've been trying to teach her, and teaching someone to play backgammon as well is such a interesting experience. It makes you think about how you think about the game and how you talk about the game. But she's really taken to it. She comes to the local social game that I go to on Saturdays. She's beaten grown-ups 3 and 4 times her age on a
Wow.
regular basis. Yeah, she's still learning, but she'll be a much better player than me.
That's great. I try to teach my kids, maybe they're younger, but it's like it's much more difficult to teach a child than an adult because like at least my kids, they have a very short attention span. And usually
Hmm.
when you're teaching an adult, it's an adult who's interested in learning and curious. But
Yeah.
interesting that you mentioned that. I did another interview with a top backgammon player from Denmark named Daniel Sorensen. He
Hmm.
does this thing called school backgammon where he teaches children, and he had an event where he had like 500 children playing in a big tournament one day.
Oh, wow.
That's amazing, but it's great. It's great for
Well, I'll
kids.
make sure to go and listen to that. Well, watch that video. That sounds really
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, that one will be released soon, and I think it's a great game to teach children because it teaches children a lot of different things like patience, discipline, how to be a gracious loser, like all of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it just comes down to starting with principles. So I don't know if there's a right or a wrong way to teach kids, but with my daughter, before we looked at anything like setting up the board, it was just one check at either side. Race around the board. Who won? Why did they win? It was luck. And now we've got two strategies. No, two checkers. So now we have a choice to make. And starting to introduce the idea of when you're ahead, race, and when you're behind, you need a plan B. You'd start. Well, that's where I started anyway. And we've had fun
Right.
doing that.
It depends on their age too, because I have my
Yeah.
4-year-old, and she doesn't know any of this stuff, but you know what she likes to do is she likes to roll the dice through the baffle box because it's fun, it makes a nice sound. She likes to hit the clock, she likes
Yeah.
to move the different checkers and different colors, so you start with that and then they play.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's great to hear.
Great. So what kind of work do you do?
So I'm a teacher. I worked in adult education for many years, teaching English as a second language, focusing kind of especially on academic English. And then 6 years ago or so, I transferred into the school system. So I teach in primary schools or elementary school, I think would be the term in
Yeah, yeah.
your part of the world. And again, there I'm teaching, or supporting kids who are learning English as an additional language, and also just working in the learning support sphere, just supporting teachers and students and families when students have additional learning needs, and trying to improve access to curriculum for students with disability, for example.
Yeah, that's very important. Children are the future, and it's very difficult to work with children sometimes. So thank you for your efforts. So we're going to be talking a lot about backgammon, but do you have any hobbies and interests outside of backgammon?
I mean, it's pretty much just at this stage in my life, backgammon and music for me. When I was younger, I used to play in a few bands. Music's been a big part of my life. I still mess around a little bit now with music. I record bits of music for the show sometimes. But between kind of work and family, backgammon and music is pretty much it. I like to write a little bit, watch movies, but that's about where I'm at.
Do you play an instrument?
I play a few, and none of them well. Like I don't know. As a kid, there was a piano in the house, and I think even
Yeah.
before, actually, I probably gave it up once I started having piano lessons. But just sitting down, and kind of working it out myself, I played euphonium, trumpet, and then guitar. Started when I was about 11, and that was a big thing for me for a long time. And now I play a little bit of ukulele, guitar, bass. I played drums for a long time in bands as well. I'm trying to relearn properly how to play sort of the piano now as well. So, yeah, just a little bit of everything. None of it particularly well, just for my own enjoyment.
Music is also another good hobby and exercise for children as well.
Yeah,
Like my kids love music. My son plays piano.
brilliant.
It's just great for your overall mindset. I think it helps with that.
Yeah, I think so. And I'd love for my kids to do that as well. But I'm, sort of, I don't know, aware in my situation when I started having lessons, that's when I wanted to give up. So I'm just not trying to push there's instruments in the
Yeah,
house. They pick them up, they play them, they put them down. And
I
I just
know.
hope that interest takes. And if it doesn't, their interest will lie elsewhere.
Right, right. Very good. So how did you first get into backgammon yourself?
Well, I've been playing since I was a kid. Really, I can still just about remember the board we had at home. It's a really strong sort of visual image. I'm not quite sure where it came from. I have this idea that maybe my brother brought it back from Greece, or I don't know if I've just imagined that, but certainly it was covered with kind of like what I think is kind of traditional Greek, imagery from antiquity, the kind of vases and I don't know. I don't know what else I can see it in my mind's eye, but it's hard to explain. But then, we just we played as kids, and then I don't really remember learning, although I'm sure it was my dad who must have taught me. He After he retired, started taking backgammon more seriously and played tournament backgammon in the UK for a good chunk of time in the kind of early mid 2000s, I guess. But then as I got older, just it was staying up late at night, playing all night with friends. None of us really knew what we were doing. And again, I don't remember like if we taught each other or we just sort of learnt together. Somehow we knew you do this with a 3-1 and you do this with a 6-1, and that was about it. Apart from that, it was just a hit fest, or some of us would just stay super safe all the time. And but yeah, just it's just been a part of my life. And at times I've dedicated more time to it. At times I've had time away from the game. But yeah, my whole life really, although still not much better than I was then. I'm slowly improving the last couple of years.
I remember when I was growing up, we used to play with those same types of wooden boards with the
Mm,
ornate patterns. It was just like beautiful, and that was
yeah.
part of what I really liked about it, the beautiful boards, 'cause you see like all these patterns. So great. What would you say you enjoy the most about backgammon?
I think, well, I thought about that a lot in sort of preparation for this interview, and I think there's lots of things really. I think one part of it is just that it's an exciting game. Like many people, that combination of luck and skill that is not entirely unique to backgammon, but certainly has some unique characteristics. And that the fact that you can, once you learn enough, if you become like an intermediate player like me, you can just about make your way through a tournament. You can compete against players who are far, far stronger than you, and every now and again, things go in your favor, and that's exciting. I think the more I learn about the game as well, I just love how deep the skill level is, and how I could spend the rest of my life playing, and you never run out of things to learn. There's all sorts of new things. But it's a fun game. Hitting is fun. Getting that dice roll that you needed is fun. The banter that goes around a game is just a exciting, fun experience. And like you were saying, that like the board itself as well. I think it is kind of a sensory experience for me. Like the feel of a board, and the kind of the weight of a checker in your hand, the sound of the dice. All of that that adds to the experience. I suppose the other part for me as well that I wanted to talk about a little bit. I'm autistic, Alex, and one aspect of that is that I have some difficulties with sort of social communication. And I think one of the things that I love about backgammon is that it provides an opportunity to be social in a kind of structured setting. Because no, I like to be social. I like to be around other people, in moderation. I'm quite um, comfortable, spending time by myself as well. And I rely a lot on preparation, to communicate. For this, for example, I'm happy to admit here I've got a set of notes. I know you and I are having this
So
conversation for
do
the first
I.
time, but yeah, in my head I've had this conversation, dozens of times already before, since I accepted your offer to come along. But yeah, but to be around other people in a setting where, you're with other people who have the same obsession, the same interest as you, and you can talk to them, but there's also just long periods of sitting in silence, and that works really well for me, and in a way that's kind of not acceptable or not typical in other settings. That's a big part of what I love about backgammon. And I think just also what you touched on a bit before as well about the educational benefits of the game, the social benefits, the mental health benefits of the game. There's I'm really a big believer in all of that side of the game, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely brings people together. I've met so many different people, especially with this YouTube channel. I've met people from all over the world, such as yourself and many others
Yep.
that I would otherwise had never had the chance to meet. But I play with like all sorts of people. Like we have a chouette,
Mm.
we have one player from Greece, one player from Turkey, one player from Armenia, and they all play together,
Yeah.
like you would think when you're thinking about that, there's like all sorts of political issues going on, but it just brings people together to have
Yeah.
fun, and none of that's an issue. So it's fantastic. So
That's great.
yeah,
I got into that a little bit when I spoke to Tony Diamantidis in the run up to the World Teams Championship as well, and he was just talking about the Greeks play with the Turks, and
I know.
it is this I don't know, powerful tool to bring people together, I guess, which is
Yeah, I
part of
think
what
I
we all
think
love
it.
about the game.
Yeah, I think it's great. I listened to that episode you did with Tony and Maggie, and maybe a couple months before that, I had
Mm.
actually recorded a video, an interview with them to promote the Greece tournament. Uh,
Ah, okay.
so they talked about a lot of the similar things, and I
Yeah.
think these are part of the reason why I started my YouTube channel is to try to promote backgammon, and I think your podcast is another outstanding way to do that.
Oh, thanks, Alex. The feeling's mutual. I've really enjoyed a lot of your videos, and
Thank you.
might tease
What
ahead now that I just invited you before. If we could arrange an interview later in the year to do something on
We'll
my
do
show
it,
as well,
we'll
that'd be
do it.
great. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some ways that you think people can promote backgammon other than, what we're doing?
Oh, and it's a really interesting question. I don't know if I'm best positioned to answer it from a personal perspective, but I think, like yourself, having spoken to so many people, you get people's perspectives on how on the game to promote the game. Lots of people I've spoken. Well, I mean, speak to a whole variety of people. Sometimes it's someone who has a club that regularly has kind of 8 players against a professional player who travels the world. So everyone will have different perspectives on that. But something that's come up again and again is how do we grow backgammon? It comes up again in these interviews I've been doing. How do we increase participation by younger players? How do we increase participation by women? And the incredible thing is that people are doing amazing things to achieve this. I know we'll probably sort of touch on some of the people that I've interviewed a bit later, and some of the themes that have come up. But I think um, yeah, I don't know if I've really answered your question there or avoided answering it, but those are the common themes that come up, and that I get the feeling, the sense, and this is something I've mentioned a couple of times in recent episodes, that backgammon seems to be on this sort of upward trajectory at the moment. That I've spoken to people about the kind of playing in the 80s, and then the rise of poker and the effect that that had on backgammon, and then everything that happened with the pandemic and kind of clubs shutting down and people moving to online play, and that being sort of a dip. And at the moment, the sense that I get in the people I've spoken to is that we're really kind of on an upward trajectory at the moment. And lots of people, even if they don't have answers yet, are asking this question: how do we grow the game? Where do we go from here? I think that's important.
Yeah, it's a good question. There's not really a right or wrong answer. It's just a matter of opinion. There are a lot of different things. I think like when I've spoken to people, a lot of people have said things like everything is digital nowadays, everything's on the internet. So,
Mm.
for example, we have our local club and we have a website and people find it through there. But then we have the social media, like we have a Facebook group, we have something
Mm.
called Meetup here,
Yeah.
the Instagram, and even on the YouTube, like I'll do some videos and then, people find it and then they
Mm.
show up.
Yeah. If you if you build it, they will come.
Yeah, great. So I wanted to share this website of your podcast. Yeah, so this is Over the Board by Ed Hall. I'll put a link in the description, and I'll just kind of like browse through it quickly. And there's a trailer with some great uh, 10 out of 5 reviews. I was trying to put a review, but do you have to be signed in to do that?
It varies across platforms. So
Okay.
because, unlike sort of YouTube, I'm not just in one platform. I have a like a distributor, so it goes through Spotify, Apple Podcasts.
Oh, I see. Okay, so this is like
Um,
Apple.
yeah. So for Apple, you have to be signed in. I think
I
for
see.
Spotify, maybe you don't to leave a review, but you have to leave a comment. So it varies a bit from platform to platform.
Great. So I see you have a lot of guests. So we can see some of this. So there are a lot of episodes so far, and I wanted to talk a little bit more about your podcast.
Mm.
So what inspired you to start a podcast in the first place?
So again, there's kind of multiple parts to that answer. A big part of it was just that I like podcasts, and I was looking for one to listen to, and at that time, not being able to find one. For me, it started with Serial, this sort of wildly popular true crime podcast from about 10 years ago that was part of like from the team that did This American Life. And since then I've been listening to podcasts about music, about sport, all sorts of topics. And there's tons of great backgammon content on places like YouTube. And your channel is fantastic for combining together all these different elements. You have these sorts of interviews, you have analysis, you have lessons, you have videos on strategy. And I love your channel, but I was just looking for something that was kind of my idea of a podcast, kind of 30, 40 minute sort of polished presentation of an interview, mixed in with little bits of music and other stuff, and I just couldn't find it. So I thought, well, why not try making one? I'd already sort of dipped my toe into making podcasts. I make a podcast about music with a friend of mine. Well, it'd be a bit broad to say it's about music. We kind of obsess about a particular album and then interview the people who made that album. So I had that in my kind of background, and he's been hugely helpful as well in helping me get this set up because he has his own podcast production company. So it's it's good to have that sort of help. But I did a little bit of work in community radio. I've done some basic voiceover stuff. I've recorded an audio book. I'm not a producer by any means, but I've recorded music. I know my way around audio editing software. So just all these things came together, and I thought, well, I can't find one, so I'll try making one. And yeah, that was part of the main inspiration behind it, I guess.
Yeah, I don't
Uh,
listen to many podcasts really
mm,
myself. I just live a few blocks from my office, so I have a short commute. But I know a lot of people listen to that when they're during their commute to work, back and forth. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't get that sort of analytics back in terms of I can see what
Right.
countries people are listening in, but yeah,
Right.
anecdotally, absolutely. I think the commuter was a big driving force behind the kind of stellar rise of podcasts that's happened over the last, oh goodness, I don't know, 10, 20 years, and continues to grow. Although kind of like YouTube as well, there's you've got your really high performing ones, and the vast majority of podcasts, never make it past the first episode. You only have to make, a couple of hundred downloads, and you're already in like the top 30% of podcasts ever made out of all of the endless content.
Great.
But yeah, and again, that's a part of what I like about. I guess another reason why I wanted to do it to make something that I could spend the time on to edit and play around with and make it sound good in a set of headphones, make it sound good on a smartphone speaker, make it sound good in a car. And especially early on, I was always testing things out. How does this sound, and how can I um, kind of master the final product to make it sound good in different environments? And I'm still learning that. I don't always get it right. every now and again I listen back to an episode and think, oh, I want to go back and tweak some of the EQ settings there. But I think another huge part of it for me though is it was coming back to what I was talking about before. I do love the sort of control factor I get from the editing process. I'm not always the most sort of natural interviewer. I often sort of warn my guests about this, that the conversation might be derailed a few times a few times along the way. But for me, it's like a superpower being able to kind of go back and just edit and tweak and change and distill and refine. And I try and do that. Well, I hope I do that always in a way that's respectful to my guests. I'm not trying to change the message that someone's communicated, unless, of course, they've asked me, "Oh, could we, take that bit out?" Or I wasn't really happy with that part. And I think lots of people can relate to that. The idea of looking back on a conversation, or I wish I hadn't said that, or why didn't I say this? But I think for me, and I don't pretend to speak on behalf of other neurodiverse people. This is just my personal experience. I relive previous conversations endlessly. That just goes round and round in my head, analyzing it for misunderstandings, and that can be quite an unhealthy thing for me. I can get stuck in this sort of endless loop of kind of revisiting past social experiences. But with the podcast, the interview finishes and I go, okay, I can edit that now, and I do, and I take my time to do it, and when the finished episode is ready, and sometimes there's a big delay between when I interview and when I release the episode. I put it out to the world. It's polished. It's finished, and that's just I don't know, a cathartic thing for me. Yeah, I get a lot of personal satisfaction out of the editing process, I guess.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, and it's an achievement every time you publish one of those. So it's great. It's called Over the Board, and you're able to kind of bring together two things that you enjoy doing the podcast, editing the music, as well as
Yeah.
backgammon. So that's great. I really enjoy the podcast. You've had a lot of guests. So how do you find your guests in the first place?
Well, at first it was just a bit haphazard, and I've tried to sort of refine that process. So I just, I set up an Instagram account. Then I realized there was lots of backgammon happening on Facebook, and I had kind of excused myself from Facebook about 10 years ago, and I'm back
Right.
in there now, just for that part of my life, the backgammon part of my life. But at first, I was just emailing so many people and saying, "Hey, I'm making a podcast. Do you want to come on and be on it?" And over time, I've started to think more about, well, realistically, how many interviews can I do at a time, and what sort of variety of guests do I want to have? But also, just through doing the process of doing interviews, people said, "Oh, I know this guy who makes boards. He'd be really interesting for you to talk to." And yeah, oh, my friend has a background collection. Have you thought about interviewing collectors? And yeah, so that becomes part of it as well. And I found quickly I had to be a lot more organized and get my spreadsheet going and keep track of who I've spoken to and who I've asked. But I think also I've just found that, and I think I'd already sort of come to realize this with the previous podcast, that sometimes you have this idea of, I really really want to interview this person, but sometimes the people that you want to chase and pursue, that's not always the best interview. It's the person who says, "Yeah, sure, I'll do it," and people who love to talk, make great interview subjects. So, yeah, sorry, that's a bit of another haphazard answer, but yeah, I suppose there's lots of
I
ways to
know.
it.
It's I have the same sort of situation because there are a lot of people that I like to have on, but some people, for whatever reason, they don't want to do it, or
Mm,
they're not good with that kind of thing, which is fine. But you
yeah,
ask people, and it's fun. I've interviewed a lot of the board makers, and that's fantastic. I've had players, organizers, and it's actually very enjoyable, and I learn a lot about the different aspects
yeah,
of backgammon. And I think we have a mutual friend, Guy Haslam from Bone Club, and I
yeah.
did an interview with him recently, and he showed me a tour of his workshop where he makes the boards, and it's just
It's amazing, isn't
fascinating
it?
if you've never
Yeah,
seen something like that.
yeah, yeah, really good. And I guess something as well that I mean, Guy spoke and he he gave the tour to me, but you have the opportunity to show some of this stuff, I guess, to your channel as well. And yeah,
Yeah, that's the benefit of video, so
yeah,
audio is a little bit different. But then I have, like, more things to edit too. I have to edit the video and the audio.
it's a lot of work, isn't it?
It's a lot of work, but I was in the same situation, and now I kinda, like, have a schedule. I have
Mm,
things like I have templates, so I can easily do, like, 2 or 3 videos in a single day and then,
yeah,
put them in the queue, and I got to a point where I have about 2 months worth of videos already in the queue. So
Mm,
like I was sick recently for a few days, so I took like a week off. I took 2 weeks off and I
mhm.
didn't do anything, and it's fine. I mean, I try to do one every weekday, but I don't think you're doing that once a week or once every 2 weeks or
Fortnightly, I think that's about as
fortnight.
much as I can manage at the moment, and I'm
I know
starting to
it's
think, yeah, that
but
maybe I
when
need
you
to. Oh, sorry, go on.
when you have a job, you're busy, you have
Yeah,
kids, it's a lot of work.
yeah, it is. I think I need to think about whether I do it every fortnight, or do I do 9 months and then take a break for 3 months, or do 2 months on, 1 month off? In terms of the longevity of the show. But for now, I'm certainly continuing with fortnightly while I continue to build the show. But you have to start thinking ahead. I think lots of people, it's easy to bite off more than you can chew,
Yeah.
and I want this to continue for as long as there's anyone listening. If there's one person listening to it, I want to keep making it. So I need to start planning about how to make it sustainable in the future as well.
Yeah, what I found is you have to find out what works best for you and do it like that.
Yeah.
Uh, so good. So you've had a number of episodes thus far. Who have been some of the most interesting guests that you recall?
Well, it's a great question and a sort of difficult one to answer as well, because you know different interviews have been interesting for different reasons, and that's one of the things that I want the show to be about, to kind of focus on all aspects of the game. It was a huge thrill talking to Michi early on. Who's someone whose books I've read and someone I admire. But just this week I've spoken to someone in my hometown in Manchester who you know um, knows a bit about the organisation of the game there. Plays Chouette with a handful of friends, and I think both of those are perspectives that it's important to kind of put forward, and that's what I want the show to be about, all aspects of the game. I'm talking to Michael Liberopoulos early on. Strato was fantastic as well. Just if you want to hear stories about his experiences in the jungles of Costa Rica to the
Oh, yeah.
first $1 million tournament. Like what I was saying before. Some people are just sort of natural storytellers, and he's one of those. And it was I think my first question was, "Hi, Michael, how are you?" And he spoke for about 40 minutes. It was fantastic. So that was great. Talking to Remy Davenport was really interesting.
She's
Um, you know,
fantastic.
yeah, and someone who I became aware of because of her presence online, and she's done many interviews, and that you can read about some of her achievements. But that was just one that also a lot of response from people just saying how they were inspired by what she's been doing, and that's a nice part of doing the show as well, sort of hearing from listeners and people who are interested in what's going on. Um, yeah, I don't know. It'd be hard pressed to sort of choose one particular person, because I've enjoyed all the interviews, but that I am also interested in talking to people sort of outside of or adjacent to backgammon. So my first interview with a non-backgammon player was an interesting one for me. I spoke to this reporter from the ABC, which is their sort of main government news service here in Australia, who is a tech reporter, and we just talked about the origins of AI and about Rosenblatt and Minsky, and um, the rise of neural nets, and how that was kind of after a kind of a flurry of excitement in the late 50s, early 60s, it was then sort of derided and maligned, and replaced with a very different approach to artificial intelligence, and how all that then changed with backgammon, and in the late 80s, early 90s, and people like Gerald Tesoro and what he did with neural nets, which was, in terms of the neural net wider community, way ahead of other games. He was a real innovator, I think. Yeah, I don't know. I could just go through the whole list of episodes and talk about things I liked about each interview, but that gives you a taste of some of the things that have been interesting for me.
And I think it's a great way to have these people on because you cross promote different things in
Mm,
different ways on different platforms, and that sort of thing really helps promote backgammon. Like you mentioned, Remy, I had her, and
mm,
she does a lot of social backgammon, and it's like almost completely different from what I'm used to. And then you have other people like Michi and like other top players like Dirk Sheeman, Mochi, who have
mm.
their own YouTube channels, and you just kind of cross promote that.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's fantastic. What do you know which one has been the most popular podcast episode?
Um, I suppose there's different ways to measure that because some of the early episodes, because they've been there for a long time, and often
Right.
new listeners go back and listen. Some of those are the highest overall numbers, but we'll often sort of measure it in terms of their release window, so the first 48 hours. So that interview with Remy was certainly up there. The most recent one that was a kind of Australian special that featured several different players and different perspectives about the game in Australia was another big one for me. But it's just been overall just kind of gradual increase. It's still I have a small audience, but I get a kick out of the fact that it's worldwide. I've got listeners in some 60 different countries, I guess. And
True.
what started with a few dozen listens has turned into a few hundred, and now it's sort of going upward of 1,000 a month, and it just I don't know. There'll be a ceiling somewhere, but at the moment it just continues to grow, and that's just a huge thrill for me. I really I get a kick out of doing it. And what I mentioned before as well, just about hearing from people as well, because like we said before, it's available on sort of different platforms, and some of those, like with Spotify, gives you the option to kind of comment on individual episodes. That's not always available on every platform that the show is on. But when someone takes the time to sit down and write an email, and I get messages once a week, and sometimes it's a quick hello on Facebook. Sometimes it's a big long email, people talking about their love of the game and why they like the show and what stories have kind of had an impact on them or inspired them. Again, in the case of Remy, I got several people just saying, wow, that's made changed how I feel about Backgammon and what I want to do with the game. And yeah, I can't remember where this answer started. Sorry,
Yeah,
I've
yeah,
wandered
that's
again.
fantastic. So a lot of popular episodes. What has been the listener feedback for your podcast?
Well, just overwhelmingly positive, really. And I'm sure there's people who, might listen to the show once and think, oh, well, that's not for me. And, you're not going to hear from those. The people that tend to hear from,
Yeah,
again, because it's usually through, sort of direct communication, it's, people who are enjoying the show. Um, it's been nice because, this is what I wanted to try and achieve to some people to comment and say, it's perfect for my daily commute. And, I've been looking, people who are like me, looking for something to fill this gap in their podcast listening. Um, but yeah, it's just been really positive and like I say, just sometimes really touching when someone takes the time to sit down and write you a long email and tell you their background story and what they love about the game. And yeah, so I'm just still kind of in awe that anyone's listening, and it just makes my day when getting messages from listeners. It's a huge part of what inspires me to keep going with the show and keep trying to grow it.
that's great. A lot of people I see really enjoy it, and they make comments on social media. So I appreciate that. What do you see yourself in terms of the future of your podcast? Like, where would you see yourself in maybe a year's time?
Well, again, I don't really know. Part of that relates to, me thinking about how much time I can spend on the show and whether, in terms of its longevity, it might be better to have, periods of breaks throughout the year. In terms of the content, I mean, I mentioned before, I'm interested in speaking to people sort of outside of the game as well. I'd love to get into psychology more and about, human perceptions of luck, because, luck is a human idea. It's something that we've invented, and speaking to psychologists about that, speaking to mathematicians about that, whether or not they're background players. I'd love to kind of present those sorts of perspectives as well. I think I'd like to talk about behavior in the game. And how you experience talking to someone, and then you sit down across the board from them, and it's a different experience. And online behavior and some of the problems I think background faces in that area as well. And you know, my core staple diet is still players, organizers, board makers, all people connected to backgammon in different ways. But I think one aspect of the show is I'd like to delve into some of these topics in a bit more detail and maybe combining perspectives from people inside and outside the game.
That's fantastic. So, wonderful. Thank you very much for your time. It's been a lot of great information about your podcast. I encourage the viewers to listen to your podcast. I'll put a link in the description. What else? Is there anything else we missed that you'd like to discuss regarding the podcast or backgammon in general?
Um, well, I suppose just one thing that I thought about again, it relates to lots of your questions about the reason why I chose to make the show and what I want the show to be about and where I want it to go. And just that ultimately I'm interested in stories, and I think that's what I enjoy in the podcasts that I listen to and what I'm aiming to achieve. I think you can take, any group of people that share an obsession or an interest, in this case, backgammon, and you'll find stories. And I want the show to be as much about that, And again, the stories of people who spend their life traveling the world to play backgammon, and the people who, just play once a year with their family. I want to make the show as much about stories as it is about backgammon, I guess.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you very much to my new friend, Ed Hall of the Over the Board Backgammon podcast. Do you have any final comments before we conclude the video?
Just how much I've been loving your channel, especially having a dig into it the last few weeks. I love the consultation sort of matches between players. I watched John O'Hagan and Kit Woolsey
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
just a few days ago. I just yeah, I think what you're doing is amazing. I think lots of people appreciate your show, so I'm just going to take
Thank
this
you.
opportunity to sort of send some love your way. I think your show is
Thank you. I
fantastic.
appreciate that. That's actually a similar sentiment to the feedback I get from other people. It's like when you watch these top players play, those are
Mm.
the most popular ones. They get the most views. But the thing that I found challenging is, there are maybe 100 grandmasters in the world, and not all of them want to be on the YouTube channel, which is
Yeah,
fine. And now I've kind of gone through like all of them, and some of them are playing each other for the second time. But that's okay because there's
yeah.
always a new game, something you can learn. So it's a lot
Every
of
game is
fun.
different. Yeah, great.
Very
Well,
good.
thank you so much, Alex. Yeah, thanks for inviting me. It's been really great to get to know you a bit.
My pleasure. Look forward to being on your podcast at one time, and if you ever like, you're welcome to join
Yeah.
again, and we can play a game
Sure.
on the channel. Yeah, we'll arrange that. All
I'd
right.
love that a lot. Thanks, Alex.
My pleasure. Thank you again to Ed Hall from the Over the Board Backgammon podcast. We'll go ahead and conclude the video. Thank you to the viewers for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe, and you'll be notified every time I upload a new video. Let me know what you think in the comments below, what you'd like to see in future videos, and I'll work on it. Again, if you love backgammon, you can become a member of this channel, giving you exclusive access to the most popular videos. My book, Backgammon Strategies, is available. There's a link in the description to where you can get it. And if you're interested in the lessons, please contact me via email. My email address is also in the description. I look forward to seeing you in future videos, and until then, keep rolling your dice.